I shall be talking about conversion. Anglo-Saxon conversion very rarely gets mentioned as opposed to the Viking conversion. Conversion is a bit of a blanket term. However, I'll try and unravel it as best we can. Prior to Christianity, we had Saxon gods and the Viking gods, there are subtle differences. Norse Vikings had Odin or Odin, whereas the English had Wotan or Woden. There's Tunar for the English, Thor or Thor for the Norse, and the list goes on. There were differences in the pagan religion because nothing really set down. In the Norse, you'd get the blood feasts, Uppsala. I'm presuming there were similar things, I don't know, in this country. But each household had, although they worshipped the same gods and goddesses, worshipped them in a different way. We'd already had a taste of Christianity with the Roman period, and there were Christians who kept themselves in hiding basically because it probably wasn't safe to go around saying it. And we have missionaries. Rome by this time was fully established, and obviously would want to exercise his influence, bringing in ties, but also through the spiritual enlightenment that he offered. So on they went. They landed. First, the Saxons really they were more charitable about things than you think. This is the age of Bede, and that's an interesting point. We have Bede's History Ecclesiastica. Most of the people couldn't read, and that included monks. Who was he writing it for? Actually, when I was a student, we actually covered this particular topic. I mean, it's all well, you can write anything you like, but if people can't read, it's rather a waste of time. So it's aimed specifically, and of course, would be not necessarily kings, because not all kings could read and write. Charlemagne, for instance, could read, but he couldn't write, which was deliberate so that he could read everything, but not put his name to stuff. So there would be at least one person at the king's court who would be learned regarding letters, and he could then interpret that to the king, chieftains, and it would permeate down theoretically through society. And by and large, the people were pretty receptive on the face of it. I mean, I'm sure that the old belief still lingered, especially in the country, hence the name pagan, which is from the Latin pagani, meaning country dweller. Then there are trading advantages. The Pope said you cannot trade with each other if you're pagan, and that limited your market quite a lot. So, if you've got numbers of gods all over the place, one more isn't going to make much difference. And fair enough, you get baptised, bit of water. When you're in England, hide your hammer, bring a cross out at sea, out comes the hammer. When you go out to Islam, you take an Islamic name. That's the way they thought, rightly or wrongly, it's not for me to say. So, the church became established, and it was usual that the king or chieftain would give land for them to build a church, and they built on that. It's very clever. I mean, it took only about 3 generations before the majority of people were Christian. Well, or said they were. Some of the old festivals were taken over, and life prospered. And by the time the Vikings came, 793, Anglo-Saxon Britain was one of the richest countries in Europe. Fabulously wealthy, in fact, hence that's why they came. So you have a wealthy society, and the church influences so much. So why did Christianity take on so well? Well, normally it did, because word of God. It had a lot more to offer for townspeople. Did it give more to women or not? I don't know. That's a point that could be argued. In some ways yes, and in some ways no. Knack was, especially in the case of King Redwald, he was Christian, and yet he had an altar to Thor. And many of the case, it's like the Bible says, one man cannot serve 2 masters. Something had to give. Christian belief system has literacy at its heart. That is the killer blow for paganism, really. What it's doing is whatever St. Paul said 2,000 years ago is written down, and then 1,000 years later you read it, and there you've got it. You've got his exact words, or the interpretation of that. So the Saxons became, I don't say whether renowned for being pious, but certainly they had a great infrastructure of Christianity. And it's quid pro quid, it helped people out one way or the other. Then 3 portents were seen in the sky. Comet, and the Vikings come storming in. The Vikings have been trading with, they'll trade with anybody, you know what I mean? Money's money. They realised that these big religious centres like Lindisfarne were filled with riches, potentially very obedient slaves, and there for the taking. I mean, the strongest thing the monks would say is, "Deus save me, God save me," which didn't really have much effect on the Vikings. So in they come, 793. They raid Lindisfarne. There's a massive castle just across the bay, so it must have been a quick raid. That's been started, and the Viking raids start again on British shores. They believed in Odin, Thor, Freya, Frigg, Hugh, and there's a list of them. And they're doing all right as far as they go. And it's a fact that Christianity at this point was holding on in Ireland, and the Irish monks, well, this ain't a good thing, mate. We've got to get the gospel back, because saving souls, and pretty profitable too. So missionaries came over. Things started to move again. Then you got zealots on the Christian side. Olaf Tryggvason, well-known converter, a very unpleasant man from what we can gather. It's convert or die as far as he was concerned. If you didn't convert, his little trick was he'd get a hollow tube. Tubes are hollow, obviously. Put it in the mouth and then slide a poisonous snake down it. So you either convert or you die. This didn't make him remarkably popular, as I'm sure you understand. But he was a very powerful warrior and king, so it's best to conform or die. This spread over to this country. There was a seedbed of Christian faith established already. And again, the old thing, if you're a pagan, you can't trade with Christians. The Vikings were essentially, despite what you read, were more traders than raiders. So people converted. And some of these Saxon women, so they married the Saxon women, who were Christian. And by about 3 generations, people were nominally Christian. Bragi would say, "Oh, I remember my granddad who used to do some weird stuff," but he'd still know about the stuff. Didn't brag about the idea that I'm a pagan because it wasn't safe. But the most notable ceremony that was taken over by the Christians, Christmas and Jolly Santa. Apparently, at the time of Mother Night, the 21st of December, would leave presents in the shoes of the children. Later on, it became stockings. And the Yule Tide feast would last 12 days. There are traces left behind. They used to have a boar's head and the Yule log, which we now have as chocolate. Yum, yum, yum. And it's like you bring the Yule log in and it should burn for 12 days. If it does, that's good luck all year. If not, well, you can have a mixed fortune. It gradually became more and more acceptable to be Christian. And as nations formed, because 793 hadn't really got Norway, Denmark and Sweden, they were rough areas, but by the time they'd settled down as nations, people had to think nationally rather than let's go raid here or there. Didn't stop completely, because you're always trying to increase your land, but also Christianity gained, the last foothold in this country, believe it or not, was the Isle of Wight. The last sort of bastion of paganism was Sweden. 12th century they finally converted. If you go somewhere like Lapland, there's a big shamanistic tradition. Finland is another one that always gets forgotten. And today things are changing. I'm a pagan, I admit it, and I'm not ashamed of it, and it's more freely accepted, and it's up to the individual to decide. But it makes quite like an interesting thing to look at the hammer and the cross. Anyway, I've rattled on quite long enough. Those of you hope would leave us a comment. We really enjoy your comments. It takes us a while to get there because there are a lot of comments and not many of us, but we will, hand on heart, will get back to you. You may like to subscribe. How long did it take the common people of Scandinavia to convert to Christianity? Well, that is a big question. We know that there was Olaf Tryggvason in about AD 1000 who forcibly tried to convert people. Basically, the aristocracy would have fallen in, like the king and his warlords would have. The average common person would pay lip service to it, but would meet in secret The word pagan actually means dweller in the country. So whilst urban areas, and especially for women, it seemed to be a better alternative than paganism. It did tend to wane a bit. It's a bit like some parts of Christianity today, where in Victorian times you always went to church, but nowadays people tend not to. There's a hardcore of people who do, and more strength to their arm. But what I'm basically saying is, what do you consider as conversion? I mean, there's lip service, and it can be enforced by law, but there's still secret meetings and things like that, which are even today are in operation. So when did they convert? I would say they're not fully converted even today. What do you think? Maybe you have some ideas. That'd be nice to hear from you. I'm not advocating one or the other. It's just what it is. So anyway, they have some magnificent churches, and we have some illuminated manuscripts and things like that. The church today is, I would say, is pretty successful. They're quite wealthy, but and I'd say that there are a hardcore of people who are devout Christians, but it's not sort of enforced like it was in my grandma's time. Well, as I say, that's my view. Why did the Vikings convert? In one word, economics. That's perhaps it's the first generation. As we know, the Vikings worshipped a number of gods: Odin, Thor, Frey, and many, many others. So the Pope boxed clever and said that no Christian could trade with a pagan. So the Vikings thought this out a bit. Okay, when we go to Istanbul, we worship their god. If we come to England and we've got to worship their god, who cares? Bit of water, hide the hammers, bring out the crosses, and we can trade. I'm not saying it's as glib as that, but or it's as easy as that, but certainly trade. That's what the Vikings lived and died for, mostly. So they then started wearing crosses. And when they left England, out went the crosses, on came the hammers. So that's all right for that generation. Now, time moves on, they get married, and they may have married a Christian woman who tolerates him, but at the same time keeps telling him about Christianity. They have children, and they're brought up as Christians. They know that Dad did some weird stuff, and they may have heard sagas and stories, but that's how they reviewed them. And then later on, they're brought up again as Christians, and paganism is pushed to the shadows. So that's basically, in a nutshell, how and why they converted. Obviously, their major thing was, if the lord of an area, a Njal, converted, it was taken as said that the rest of the people would. Whether they did or not is subject to some discussion. We know that Saxon king Redwald was a pagan, but was married to a Christian, was supposedly Christian, his name being Paul or Saul, while he had secretly an altar to Thor. So there you go. Hello, welcome back. My name is Egil, storyteller, warrior and trader. Before we get started, don't forget, press on the subscription bell in the corner there. Okay. A lot of people have asked me, how long was it before the Vikings converted to Christianity? There's no firm date, obviously. But I'll give you a possible scenario. Here comes Bragi and his longship, leaps off Lindisfarne, carries away treasures and everything else. Later on, attack the mainland and begin to settle. They are pagans. That means they worshipped Odin, Thor, Freya, Frigg, and all the rest. And in some cases there were blood sacrifices, human as well. However, the Vikings are a practical people. Pope Gregory had sent out an ultimatum that nobody was allowed to trade with a pagan. Also, they landed in England, Ireland and various other places where the women were Christian. And so they reached a compromise, got married. They had children. Those children knew that Dad did some weird things and probably even learned the stories. They in turn had children, but learned that Granddad was a little bit strange. He didn't believe in Jesus, things like that. Well, that's one part of it. If we read people like Bede, let's remember Bede was a monk, a Christian monk. He says that an area was Christianized. Well, what it means is the king of that area, or leader, we don't really know what a king is, was converted, usually via his wife. But that doesn't mean to say the ordinary poor person in the farm or in the countryside did that. The Vikings themselves, when they went trading, when they went out east, they had a Muslim day, hit the hammers. Then when they came up to Norway, it's hammers out boys, we'll trade. They come to England, they hide the hammers and take a Christian name. One example of this is Redwolf, the king of East Anglia, who when he was christened, he was called Paul, soulless. That's evidenced by some of the artifacts. We'll cover some of those another time. Okay, so they all become Christian. Monasteries start up. What is it then that attracted the people to become Christian? Well, let's take the word pagan. Pagan is from the Roman pagan, meaning country dweller. It's a relevant point because if you live in the country, you are interested in fertility of yourself, your crops, your animals, to survive. In the cities, it's a different story. Your aspirations are different. And for women, on the face of it, it seemed a better deal. They learned later it wasn't. There you go. So, they then persuaded their husbands. Business. The church got involved in business. And in the countryside, yes, what the church did was very subtle. Where you had charm in the plough, it became blessing in the plough. Sacred sites, churches were built. The bottom, say the side, pagan site was on a hill, at the bottom they'd build the church and say, yeah, we don't want to make you go up there, do your thing, but save your legs, don't worship our place, do all that. And gradually, bit by bit, I'd say probably by about 2 generations, there was also forceful conversions. We all hear about how wicked the pagans are, but spare a thought for the victims of Olaf Tryggvason, who went around, if you didn't convert, stuck a tube down your mouth, slid a poisonous slate down it, of course killed you. The Emperor Charlemagne, who attacked pagan places to Christianise them, hence you have a lot more raids on the Vikings. So all in all, each side was as bad as each other. But did they stamp paganism out? I don't think so, but you judge for yourself. Another reason that Christianity made such inroads, 2 reasons actually. 1, writing. Now the Vikings had a runic system of writing, and they did leave names and phrases. But Christianity, they wrote things down, codified it, so that a man could write something and then his grandson could read exactly what they've done. And another thing is, leading on from that, each household in the pagan times had its own interpretation of the ceremony. The man of the house was considered the priest, and we hear of some bizarre happenings involving the intimate parts of gentlemen horses. But they worshipped all the same gods, but in a different way. You had your big ceremonies like the 9-year blood feast at Uppsala, which again we'll cover in. So a combination of writing, persuasion, brings it all together. That's one of the main reasons. And the kings allowing people to take land. So it's something that been growing since Roman times, right the way through. There was a small period in Viking times when there wasn't that much Christianity. And in point of fact, Christianity was pushed right to Ireland. That was the only part of Europe at one time where Christianity existed. They sent missionaries out. Hats off to them, they were brave chaps to go along and do that. And hence now, Christianity is the major religion. It has some challenges, but we won't go into that. And the world is quite a place. So, till we meet again, wassail. Oh, don't forget to subscribe on the bell in the corner there. Okay? And leave us your comments, because we're really love to hear from them. We may not be able to cover all of them, but we appreciate them anyway. Keep sending them in. Till we meet again then. Bye here.